from Blumhouse Pictures, and Leigh Whannell, director of The Invisible Man, and also that guy who was in the bathtub in the first Saw movie. Does this reimagining live up to its historic namesake, or is it another carbon copy? What's up, guys? We just saw Wolfman, and guess what? We're gonna talk about it. Nikki, our first review of 2025, no pressure. Wolfman, Leigh Whannell, Blumhouse. What a combo.
It really is a combo, and it's one that has been successful before with The Invisible Man, and I think that if anything, that's set kind of an interesting blueprint for this film as well, because it's another interesting reimagining that tackles some very prescient themes, and I think it does so very effectively.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting how this film came about. You know, Universal kind of was trying to do that whole dark universe thing with Tom Cruise's Mummy and Dracula Untold, and then both of those flopped tremendously. So
I didn't even know Dracula Untold was part of that.
That was supposed to be, and then it did so bad that they kind of pivoted away, and they're like, no, the Mummy's gonna start it. And then the Mummy also flopped, and then they pivoted. Then Blumhouse came in and they said, hey, we're going to take these properties and we're gonna do our kind of own spin on them. We're gonna take it and we're gonna do our own unique takes with these Universal monster movie characters, and this is the product of that, if you will. And I think they did a really solid job with the movie. Like you said, you mentioned The Invisible Man, which was a massive hit. This is definitely feels like a spiritual successor to The Invisible Man. Both Leigh Whannell also wrote and directed this film, and I think that he does a great job of doing what he did with Invisible Man and taking an issue that's very serious and very important, and kind of basing the movie and the concept around that issue. With The Invisible Man, it was very obviously an issue that was very big at that time.
And still is.
And still is, but one that was being talked about all over the place. So it definitely struck a chord with people watching that movie. Whereas this one, it's not one that's talked about, but no less serious. And that is the issue of generational trauma. Especially from my interpretation of the film, generational trauma between masculine paternal figures in people's lives. And I think it's really interesting to take the concept of the Wolfman and really lean heavily into the disease aspect about it, and really the infectious part about it, and take that and apply it to a family dynamic.
Yeah, without spoiling, I do want to say something that I appreciate is the fact that it didn't really take a romanticized view of it at all, where there's nothing like super fun or cool about anything that actually happens. It's horrifying, but in honestly the least fun way possible.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a slow burn of a film. It's not really as vicious as you'd expect a movie like titled Wolfman to be, but there is a lot of really interesting, heady aspects to this movie that I really enjoyed. And with a slow burn, you get some really great character work. And that brings us to our next point, which are the actors. I think there's a lot of amazing performances in this very small cast of characters. The best, I think, is Christopher Abbott.
Oh, easily, hands down, because you don't have the movie without him, but he has to have such a nuanced, multi-dimensional performance, both just as we first meet him and then as he kind of descends into this persona.
He does such a fantastic job of towing the line between this super empathetic and human character, and then the titular Wolfman. And that in-between journey is so exciting to watch because he eats up every scene he's in. Because this transformation, and it's not really a spoiler, but it's a very different transformation than we're used to seeing in Wolfman movies. It's definitely like the film itself, a slow burn. And there's different stages to it. And to see him portray that different stages of transformation was just so magnificent, because he's giving such a wonderful physical performance. There's so much that he's able to say with his body, with looks, with mannerisms, with gestures, that you just know exactly what he means and what he's doing without him having to say a damn word.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting, is you use the term exciting for it, and I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think that's going to be this action-packed, fast-paced thriller or beat 'em up at any point in time. It's intriguing in the sense that it's visceral, it's guttural, and not in any way that you're probably expecting. And honestly, I think it makes it all the more horrifying for that.
It absolutely does, because it makes it personal, it makes it very intimate. The main focus of this film is a family of three, and we deal a lot with their everyday life, their interconnectivity with each other, their interpersonal relationships with their parental figures or their figures outside of that main triumvirate of people. And it was really kind of, I don't want to use the word exciting because it was pretty dark and intense at times, but it was really interesting to focus in on these three characters and get to watch them as they have to deal with this really horrific experience.
Speaking of which, a huge standout for me personally is Matilda Firth, who plays his daughter. And especially for child actors, I know that they can get a bad rap, but she is killing it. I know that she's had a lot of roles in recent years, and she delivers, and she has a lot that she has to do in this movie.
She is one of three main characters. This movie only has 3 leads, and she is the third one of those leads. So she has a substantial part in this movie, and she has a lot to do, and a lot of really intense scenes, both physically and emotionally. And she handles it with so much grace and prowess. I was really impressed by her performance. That being said, one of my biggest drawbacks of this movie is definitely the heavy-handedness of the themes. Yeah. As much as I love the theme that they're tackling, and I love the way that the story is used to tackle the theme of generational trauma, I think sometimes they put their foot on the gas a little too much. There will be full-on scenes where they have this beautiful visual representation of the point they're trying to get across, and then as soon as that's over, they will have one of the actors, and unfortunately, it's Julia Garner a lot of the time, who's given these pieces of dialogue that literally spell out everything we just saw, and I think that takes away from the impact of that scene and definitely cheapens it in my eyes, and that's something that I think is a huge detriment to the movie. Not one that ruins it, but one that I think if they got rid of would have definitely enhanced the watchability of this film.
Yeah, which is honestly interesting considering that a lot of the film is very visually told. And a lot of times I think there's a lot of fantastic and interesting shots they take. They actually make an effort to show us what the Wolfman's point of view actually looks like, to show that differentiation, and to very slowly and subtly show that transformation. I know you were talking about one of the drawbacks. One of the pluses for me is this very crazy bait and switch that gives you the first indication that something is wrong with him. I don't know if you know what scene I'm talking about.
Oh, I know exactly what scene you're talking about. And that's why I'm so bothered by some of the on-the-nose dialogue, because this film has some really great scenes that hit so hard. And they have Christopher Abbott giving such a physical performance that relies on his ability to create this character from the ground up with his body and his mannerisms. And then you kind of waste all of that by literally just kind of hitting us over the head with your theme.
Yeah, which is a huge shame. But I think that's also something I remember in The Invisible Man, which very blatantly tackled the themes of abuse and the Me Too movement. If you can remember how that was kind of portrayed in that movie, because I think they were very heavy-handed with it.
It was.
This is pretty much the same deal all over again, which isn't inherently bad because they're both very important messages to get across, but you're definitely not going to come away not understanding it.
I think to Leigh Whannell's credit, I think it's a little less in this movie. Because Invisible Man, I feel like it was every scene. It was like, this is what this movie's about. And I'm like, no, I got that, Leigh. You don't have to keep screaming at us. I understand. And in this one, it's fewer and further between each scene. He definitely lets more scenes breathe in this, which you have to because of how the story's structured, than he did in The Invisible Man, which I think is an evolution of his craft. And I appreciate that. I think overall, as a monster film, this is going to be not something that people expect it to be, and for me, a good way. I think they really kind of reinforce the themes and the story and rely on the actors to tell a tale as opposed to just kind of giving us cheap thrills and cheap scares. This is not a historic Wolfman movie like American Werewolf in London, but I do think it's one that's going to make you think, and it's one that's going to make you talk about it afterward. I think another issue I have is definitely the pacing of the movie. The first act feels very well paced, and then the second act, I think, takes too long and is too drawn out, and the third act is just a roller coaster ride, and we're just gunning to the end of the movie.
Oh, I completely agree with that, because I agree with you with the tightness, and everything that they accomplished in the first act was all very essential to move the story and catapult it forward. But definitely throughout the film, I felt like it was a slow burn, but not always in the best way possible.
No.
Because to some extent, you do know what's going to happen. But I think it definitely took longer to get to those points than we necessarily needed. And I think that's where some of the expository dialogue comes into play again to its detriment.
Yeah, it's almost as if they don't trust the audience, because a lot of the stuff they did take long to get to was stuff that we already saw coming a mile away, and it's not hard to figure out. So you really didn't need that slow build up to some of those scenes in the second act. But I do think the third act, even though it was really fast-paced, and I think too fast-paced at times, I do think that functions well. If only the second act was structured a little bit better, we could have had a really tight, solid movie. But that being said, Nikki, out of 5 wolf emojis, what do you give Wolfman 2025?
Ooh, so overall, I do think it's a really good film. I think it has some very high highs, but the pacing definitely drags it down a bit. And it's just not as tight of a story as I wish it would be. So I'm going to give it 3.5 wolves out of 5.
I love that. I love that. I think it is a solid attempt at a Wolfman reimagining. It doesn't reinvent the wheel. This is not something that breaks the formula and recreates it in a way that's profound and nuanced, but it is a solid monster movie. And I think it's one that's going to make you think. It's one that I enjoyed seeing. And for a January film, hey, it's pretty darn good. Another feather in the cap of Blumhouse and Jason Blum, because I did enjoy myself watching this. I'm going to give it a solid 3.5 wolves out of 5. I think you guys should definitely go see Wolfman. It is a fun time at the movies. If you guys like this video, make sure to give it a huge thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all of our latest content. If you want to check out our other movie reviews or reactions, click the link on the page. And until next time, guys, stay versed.